The first thing anyone ever noticed about Leo Braxton was the noise. It wasn't just the volume of his voice, though that was considerable, a baritone boom that could cut through the din of a packed campus coffeehouse. It was the relentless, abrasive quality of it, a sound that seemed to actively push against silence, against peace, against anything that hinted at introspection. He was a human argument, a walking, talking contradiction to the very concept of quiet faith. And on the campus of St. Ignatius University, a small, leafy Catholic college nestled in the rolling hills of Pennsylvania, faith was as much a part of the architecture as the old Gothic stone and stained glass. On that Tuesday afternoon in late October, under a sky the color of dull steel, Leo was holding court on the quad. A semicircle of students, a mix of amused followers and uncomfortable onlookers, had formed around him. His target, as it often was the statue of the Virgin Mary that stood serenely in a small grotto of weathered rock and fading impatience near the entrance to the theology department. The statue was a campus landmark, old and beloved. Her hands were outstretched, her gaze downcast with a gentle, eternal patience. The folds of her stone robes were worn smooth in places by decades of touch from passing students, a furtive brush for luck before an exam, a moment of connection in a time of grief. To most, she was a symbol of comfort. To Leo, she was the ultimate symbol of what he called intellectual surrender. "It's the perfect metaphor," he was saying, his voice dripping with performative cynicism. "A woman told she's carrying the Son of God. No agency, no choice, just a vessel, and we're supposed to build a whole worldview on that, on faith." He spat the word out like it was a bad taste. "It's a psychological crutch, a collective delusion to avoid the terrifying, beautiful truth that we're alone in a random, godless universe." Sarah Gable, a junior nursing student with a rosary tucked discreetly in her jacket pocket, felt her cheeks grow warm. She'd prayed at that statue the day her grandfather passed away, finding a strange solace in its cold, solid presence. She looked away, focusing on the golden carpet of ginkgo leaves at her feet. "Come on, Leo, lay off," muttered a guy from her biochem class, his hands shoved in his pockets. "Some people actually, believe that stuff." "And that's the problem," Leo boomed, turning his magnanimous scorn on his friend. "Belief without evidence is intellectual laziness. It's a virus, and this," he said, gesturing broadly at the statue with a flourish, "is its patient zero, a hunk of rock that people imbue with magic powers. It's pathetic." The argument escalated, as they always did with Leo. He was a debate champion, his logic a swift, sharp blade, and he easily parried the weaker, more emotional defenses of his peers. He was winning, and he knew it. The thrill of the debate, the rush of superiority, was like a drug to him. But today, the usual high felt faint. Today, the quiet dignity of the statue felt less like surrender and more like a challenge. Its silent patience felt, for the first time, like an accusation. That's when he crossed the line. It wasn't premeditated, it was a spark of pure, unadulterated ID, fueled by a need to shatter that infuriating silence forever. "You want a miracle?" he sneered, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous pitch that grabbed the attention of everyone on the quad. "You want your statue to do something? Let's see if it can feel." Before anyone could process his words, before a protest could form in Sarah's throat, Leo took 2 quick strides toward the grotto. He drew back his leg, clad in a scuffed combat boot, and with a grunt of effort, he kicked the statue square in its base. The sound was wrong. It wasn't the dull thud of stone on stone one might expect. It was a sharp, sickening crack, a sound of pure violation that seemed to suck the very air out of the afternoon. A collective gasp rippled through the small crowd. Time froze. Leo stood there, his boot still connected to the statue, a flicker of something, not triumph but surprise in his eyes. Then he recoiled, shaking his foot as if he'd been stung. On the pale limestone of the statue's base, just above the toe of her robe, a dark, jagged scar now ran several inches long. The silence that followed was heavier and more profound than any that had come before. The wind died. The chatter of squirrels ceased. Even the distant sound of traffic on the county road seemed to vanish. 20 pairs of eyes were fixed on Leo, their expressions a cocktail of horror, disbelief, and anger. He tried to salvage it, to laugh it off, but the sound that came out was brittle and hollow. See, no lightning bolt, no earthquake, just rock, broken rock. He shoved his hands in his pockets, his bravado visibly crumbling under the weight of their silent judgment. It's just a statue. But as he turned and walked away, his gait was less of a swagger and more of a retreat. He didn't look back. If he had, he might have seen Sarah Gable not looking at him but at the statue's face. She would later swear, in a voice trembling with conviction, that in the moment after the kick, the Virgin's downcast eyes had seemed to shift, just for a second, to follow Leo Braxton's retreating form. And in that stone-carved gaze, she saw not anger, but a deep, immeasurable sorrow. The story spread across campus with the speed and intensity of a wildfire. By dinner time, it was all anyone was talking about. Leo, for his part, wore his notoriety like a shield. In the loud, crowded dining hall, he held court again, replaying the event for a new audience, embellishing his own daring, omitting the strange silence that had followed. It was a necessary act of desecration, he declared, stabbing a French fry in the air for emphasis, a symbolic destruction of superstition. If they're angry, it's because on some level they know I'm right. His roommate Ben, a pragmatic engineering major who tolerated Leo's theatrics with weary amusement, shook his head. Dude, you kicked a statue, 100-year-old statue. That's not philosophy, that's vandalism. You're lucky campus security hasn't dragged you in yet. But no one came for him. There were no official reprimands, no angry emails from the administration. It was as if the event was too large, too strange for standard procedural response. The punishment, it seemed, would not be administrative. It began that night. Leo's dorm room was on the 3rd floor of a venerable old brick building. The windows were original, their wood frames warped with age. He'd always been a sound sleeper, a stone sinking into the depths of unconsciousness the moment his head hit the pillow. But that night, sleep wouldn't come. The room was oppressively hot, the air thick and stale. He threw off his blankets, but a moment later a deep, penetrating chill would settle into his bones, forcing him to pull them back up. He tossed and turned, the image of the cracked statue flashing behind his eyelids every time he closed them, and then the sounds started, not loud sounds, but subtle, maddening ones. A scratching at the window pane, like the branch of a tree, but there were no trees that tall on this side of the building, a faint, rhythmic tapping like a single drop of water falling into a basin, but he couldn't locate its source. He got up, checked the sink, the radiator, his ears straining in the dark. Nothing. Just as he was about to chalk it up to stress and finally drift off, he heard it. A sound so soft, it was almost a feeling. A sigh. A woman's sigh, laden with a grief so ancient and deep it made his heart clench in his chest. It seemed to come from right beside his bed. He sat bolt upright, fumbling for the lamp switch. The sudden light was blinding. The room was empty. He was alone. His own face, pale and wide-eyed, stared back at him from the dark window. He didn't sleep again that night. The next morning, Wednesday, was a cascade of minor misfortunes, a curated selection of bad luck that felt personal. His alarm clock failed. He woke up late, disoriented, and rushed to his first class, a literature seminar he was barely passing. As he sprinted across the dew-slick quad, his foot caught on a raised flagstone, a stone he'd walked over 1,000 times without incident. He fell hard, skinning his palms and tearing a hole in the knee of his jeans. The copy of Paradise Lost he was carrying sailed out of his hands and landed squarely in a murky puddle. Cursing, he retrieved the book, its pages now swollen and warped. A group of students walking to Mass glanced over at him, their expressions unreadable. He felt a hot flush of humiliation. It was just a trip, he told himself, a coincidence. In class, the professor, a frail, brilliant man named Dr. Evans, who had always seemed to appreciate Leo's forceful contributions, called on him to explain Milton's portrayal of the fallen angel Lucifer. Leo, who had read the material and had a dozen cutting insights prepared, opened his mouth and nothing came out. His mind was a perfect blank white slate. The words were gone. He stammered, backtracked, and offered a weak, incoherent fragment of a thought. Dr. Evans peered at him over his spectacles, not with anger, but with a strange clinical curiosity. "Are you quite all right, Mr. Braxton? You seem uncharacteristically diminished today." The class tittered. Leo, who lived for these intellectual sparring matches, could only mutter an apology and sink low in his chair. The feeling of diminishment clung to him for the rest of the day. His confidence, his most potent weapon, felt blunted. The strange occurrences were not confined to Leo. The campus itself seemed to be holding its breath. Father Mark, the young campus priest who had heard the confession of a sobbing freshman girl who had witnessed the event, felt a peculiar heaviness in the chapel during morning mass. The candles flickered erratically, though there was no draught. The lilies on the altar, fresh that morning, had wilted and turned brown by the final hymn, their petals dropping like tears onto the marble floor. Down in the town of Rosary Glen, which existed in a symbiotic relationship with the university, the story had also taken root. Old Missy Henderson, who ran the antiquarian bookshop on Main Street and knew every rumor that had ever drifted down from the hill, heard about it from a student who came in for a coffee. "Kicked the Blessed Mother," she said, her voice a dry rustle of leaves. She made the sign of the cross almost automatically. "Oh, that's bad business. That's very bad business." She leaned across the counter, her eyes sharp. "That statue's always been special. Old Father Callahan, back when the school was founded, he brought it over from Lourdes himself after he was healed there. Said the Virgin herself told him to place it where a great doubt would one day be overcome. It's never been just a statue." The student, who had only come in for a latte, left feeling unsettled, the old woman's words echoing in her mind. At the town's only hardware store, Joe Maguire, a burly man with thick, practical hands, was helping a customer when a framed photograph of his own grandmother's pilgrimage to Lourdes fell from the wall behind the counter. The glass shattered across the floor. As he cleaned it up, he told the customer about the news from the university. "My grandmom," Joe said, his voice low and serious. "She said the Virgin weeps for the faithless, but she protects her own. That boy, he stirred up something that ain't meant to be stirred." The customer, a contractor named Dan, nodded grimly. "I heard. My kid goes up there. Said the whole place feels wrong today. Cold spots in the sun. Weird echoes." He shook his head. "There's stories about this town. Old stories. Things that happened before the college was even built. The Lenape tribe that used to be here, they called this valley the listening place. They said the spirits here were strong and didn't take kindly to disrespect. The stories multiplied, weaving together past and present, faith and folklore. They spoke of a miracle from 1934, during the Great Depression, when the town's children were stricken with a fever that no medicine could break. A group of mothers had prayed through the night at the university statue. The next morning, every child's fever had broken simultaneously, and the doctors had no explanation. The statue's base was said to have been warm to the touch for a week afterward. They whispered about the time in the 50s when a construction crew, expanding the library, had tried to move the grotto. Their machinery broke down inexplicably. One worker, who had jeered at the old superstitions, suffered a heart attack on the spot. They left the grotto alone after that. Leo, isolated in his deteriorating state, was largely unaware of the growing murmur in the town below. He was fighting his own private war, a war against coincidence. His laptop, which had been perfectly fine that morning, suddenly died, taking with it a half-finished paper that was due the next day. The backup on his flash drive was corrupted. When he went to the library to use a public computer, a pipe burst in the ceiling above the carrel he'd chosen, drenching him and destroying the keyboard. He was shivering, wet, and utterly unnerved. The world, his world of logic and predictable cause and effect, was breaking down. He felt a presence, a watchful, heavy attention that followed him everywhere. He'd spin around, certain someone was behind him, only to find an empty hallway. He began to see things from the corner of his eye, a fleeting glimpse of blue, the swirl of a robe disappearing around a corner. The scent of roses would fill his nostrils in the sterile, concrete stairwell of his dorm, only to vanish a second later. The final warning came from an unexpected source. On Wednesday afternoon, desperate for a semblance of normalcy, he went to the campus rec center to shoot hoops. He was alone in the gym. The only sound, the rhythmic pound of the ball and the echo of his own breathing. He went up for a simple, uncontested layup. As he left the ground, a searing, white-hot pain shot through the ankle of the leg he had used to kick the statue. It was a pain so acute and specific it felt like a brand. He cried out and crumpled to the polished wood floor, clutching his leg. The pain subsided as quickly as it had come, leaving behind no swelling, no bruise, just a ghostly, throbbing memory. Lying there on the floor, gasping, the absolute silence of the vast gym pressing down on him, Leo Braxton felt the first true, undiluted spike of fear. This was no longer a string of bad luck. This was communication, and the message was becoming terrifyingly clear. He limped back to his dorm room as the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and violet that felt like a mockery of the turmoil inside him. He locked his door, he drew the blinds, he tried to read, to watch a movie, to do anything to silence the rising panic in his mind. But the memories of the past 24 hours played on a loop. The crack of stone, the gasps of the crowd, the sigh in the night, the falling book, the shattered glass, the searing pain. He was exhausted but terrified to sleep. When he finally did succumb, his dreams were not of silence, but of a courtroom. He stood in the dock, accused by a faceless jury. The judge, whose features were hidden in shadow, pointed a bony finger at him. But the voice that pronounced judgment was not a man's. It was a woman's voice, filled with a sorrow that could drown worlds. It spoke a single word: see. He woke with a start, drenched in a cold sweat. The digital clock on his bedside table read 3 a.m., the witching hour, the hour of Christ's passion. The room was ice cold, and he was not alone. A light was coming from the corner of his room, not the harsh glare of a bulb or the blue glow of his electronics. This was a soft, internal light, a luminescence that seemed to emanate from the air itself. It coalesced, swirling like a nebula, and began to take shape. Leo tried to scream, but his voice was gone. He tried to move, but his limbs were made of lead. He could only watch, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird, as the light resolved into a form. It was a woman. She wore robes of deepest blue, and her head was covered. Her face was in shadow, but he could feel her gaze upon him. It was the same gaze Sarah Gable had seen, a gaze of profound, universe-spanning sorrow. It was a sorrow that saw every doubt, every act of cruelty, every moment of pride in his life, and wept for it. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The knowledge flooded into him, not as words, but as pure, unbearable understanding. He saw the weight of his act. He saw it not as a trivial vandalism, but as a tiny, ugly speck in a vast tapestry of pain and disbelief that stretched back through centuries. He saw the countless acts of genuine faith, of desperate hope, of pure love that had been directed toward that piece of stone he had defiled. He felt the loneliness of his own worldview, the cold, empty prison of his certainty. And he understood, with a clarity that was more terrifying than any phantom, that he was wrong. He had been wrong about everything. The figure raised a hand, not in threat, but in invitation. And in its palm, Leo saw them. The wounds, the stigmata, they glowed with the same soft, terrible light. He saw the love that had accepted that suffering, and he saw the depth of his own disrespect in the face of it. A sound was wrenched from the deepest part of his soul, a sob of pure, agonizing remorse. It was a sound of complete and total shattering. The light began to fade. The figure dissolved back into the air from which it had come. The cold retreated, feeling rushed back into his limbs. Leo Braxton, the loudest skeptic on campus, fell to his knees beside his bed, buried his face in his hands, and wept like a child. The next morning, the campus awoke to a miracle. It was Sarah Gable, on her way to early morning clinicals, who saw it first. She almost dropped her travel mug. She stopped dead in her tracks, her breath catching in her throat. There, in the grotto, the cracked statue of the Virgin Mary stood, as it always had. But the jagged scar on the base, the wound inflicted by Leo's boot, was gone. The stone was seamless, whole, as if the violation had never happened, but that wasn't all. Clutched in the statue's outstretched hands, where there had been nothing before, was a single perfect blood-red rose. It was fresh, beaded with morning dew. It sent a faint, sweet perfume that hung in the crisp autumn air. A crowd began to gather. Students, professors, maintenance staff, they came in silent, reverent clusters. They saw the healed stone. They saw the impossible rose. Whispers began, prayers were murmured. Father Mark was summoned. He arrived, his face pale, and fell to his own knees, making the sign of the cross with a trembling hand. The news spread, pulling people from their beds, from their breakfasts, from their classes. The entire campus seemed to converge on the quad, a silent, awestruck congregation. And then they saw Leo. He was walking toward the grotto. His steps were slow, deliberate. The cynical swagger was gone, replaced by a humility that seemed to alter his very stature. He looked older. His face was pale, his eyes red-rimmed, but they held a new light, a startling clarity. He ignored the crowd, his gaze fixed solely on the statue. He walked right up to it. The crowd held its breath, unsure what he would do. Would he mock this too? Would he try to explain it away? He didn't. Leo Braxton slowly, reverently, went down on both knees on the cold ground. He reached out a trembling hand, and with a touch as gentle as a whisper, he traced the place where the crack had been. He bowed his head. His shoulders shook. When he looked up, his face was wet with tears. He spoke, and his voice, once so loud and abrasive, was now a raw, broken thing, but it carried in the perfect silence. "I believe," he whispered, the words a confession and a prayer. "I am so sorry. I believe." A collective sigh went through the crowd. Some wept, some prayed. Many just stared, trying to comprehend the undeniable, miraculous thing that had happened in their midst. The investigation that followed was swift and inconclusive. Campus security found no evidence of tampering. No prank could explain the seamless healing of ancient stone. Botanists from the university were baffled by the rose. It was a variety not native to the continent, and it remained fresh and blooming for a full week before finally wilting. Leo himself refused to speak of what had happened in his room that night, only saying that he had been shown the truth. He withdrew from the university for the rest of the semester, entering a period of quiet retreat and study. The event at St. Ignatius University faded from national headlines, relegated to the realm of local legend and devout belief. But for those who were there, the memory never faded. The statue still stands in its grotto, its stone unbroken. Some students still touch it for luck, but now they do so with a deeper reverence, an awareness of the mystery it holds. Leo Braxton never became a preacher. He completed his degree in philosophy and went on to become a quiet, thoughtful writer, his work exploring the fragile, often invisible line between doubt and faith. He was a man who had been argued into silence, not by superior logic, but by a love so vast it could express itself only as a miracle. The story ends not with a bang, but with a lingering, holy silence. It serves as a haunting reminder that some things in this world defy explanation, that the universe is far stranger and more wonderful than we often allow ourselves to believe. It suggests that faith is not the opposite of reason, but sometimes its miraculous conclusion, and that even the loudest skeptic in the face of undeniable grace may finally learn to kneel. Thank you for listening to this journey into the unexplained. If this story moved you or made you think, please show your support by liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Your engagement helps us bring you more stories that explore the profound and mysterious corners of our world. Until next time.